Good evening to you, or morning if it's appropriate. We appreciate you joining us in this class today. We are studying the 13 love letters from the Apostle Paul, written as it is to you and I. And we're making every application that is possible to make these letters personal and not just historical, written to those churches and those men that he had a relationship with. We are looking at the letter to Titus, and we will cover this material, this short book and letter, in 2 sessions. So this is the first of 2. We see that Titus was a Gentile. He was a convert, and we're going to give you some more depth here in just a few moments. He traveled with Paul, and he served under Paul and traveled and served well. At this writing, he is the pastor of the church on the Mediterranean island of Crete. He desperately needs a letter of authority to back him up. You know, there were no ordination processes then, and no papers. And so he needs a letter of authority for himself from Paul, as well as some much needed personal encouragement. And Paul provides all of that in this letter. One of the I'll say long distance comparisons are to think about the big city church of the metropolis of Ephesus, a big city church under Pastor Timothy, compared with the small town, almost a rural church on the small island of Crete, led by Pastor Titus. We see how Paul, in this comparison, applies the same standards. He sees the same need in the churches, and he has the same expectations of the spiritual leaders and of the congregation in both churches. So he's not modifying things for location, for culture, for size of city, size of church, same standards, same message. So some of this will seem redundant as we have seen the message of Paul in other letters. The letter to Titus was probably written by the Apostle Paul from the city of Corinth about 64 AD, if you're keeping track of those historical and geographical records. Paul writes to a very gifted and a very young co-worker. Paul had many good things to say about Titus, and of course he was Greek-born, which makes a certain problem for other people, not for Paul, and he is a well-established believer. For references to Titus, if you would like to look up some of those, they are from Galatians chapter 2, 2 Corinthians chapter 7 and 8, 2 Timothy chapter 4, and Acts chapter 15. All make references to the life, the ministry, and the man we know as Titus. He was ministering and overseeing at least one church. There may have been multiple churches on this island of Crete, and the Cretans had a bad reputation, both socially and morally. Simply put, these are extremely hard people to work with. They're not easy converts at all, and not easy to deal with. And here we have a young pastor with a very hard situation, very difficult and challenging elements here. And so we'll list a few reasons for the Apostle Paul to write to Pastor Titus. There's false teaching present that threatens all of the churches in Crete. We don't know how many there were, but we assume there were more than one local congregation. There are conflicts that blatant conflicts that we discover between their statement of faith and their lifestyle. What they say they believe and then what they live out as a testimony are quite different, and Paul addresses that as well. Titus needs some instruction in church organization, some things. There's no history to refer to. There's no handbook. Paul has written now between Titus and Timothy the handbook for church organization and for function and administration. Then there's just the encouragement and exhortation that Paul, of course, gives to Titus on a personal basis, and we see the very need of that. I've traveled extensively, been in hundreds and hundreds of churches and many dozens of countries, and I think that the largest need, the biggest need in all of missions work is not what is assumed, but is encouragement. It's the largest need, in my opinion, of what I've seen in 28 countries. We need to give encouragement to those that are involved in the mission field, in foreign situation, and we understand from different sources that about 75% of the world's Christians are under direct opposition and persecution today. I think that there is some persecution in our country, the United States, but it's more subtle. It's not direct and so much in your face as it is threatening in other countries. The pattern of Paul's writing is so very helpful. I think it gives us a model for our own tutoring, our own mentoring, our own teaching and practice in administration of churches, and that is Paul never points out a problem without providing a solution. Somehow there are those that feel skilled in their pointing out of problems, and they report to the pastor and they walk away. And I've heard some advice given this way: don't bring me a problem without also bringing two solutions. Help me with this. Help me administer this. They may be impractical. They may be not possible, but it extends the boundary of your thinking if you're already trying to grapple with a solution to the problem and not just lay that egg at the doorstep of the pastor. In the first 4 verses of chapter 1 in Titus, we see the emphasis of Titus' ministry, and Paul is consistent in the emphasis that he wants displayed and practiced, and it's twofold. And this is very simplified, but it covers a lot of territory. Number 1 is the message. The message has to be consistent, and we'll break that down in just a moment. And secondly, the motive. Both of these things have to be in place according to the Apostle Paul. He refers to the common faith in several ways and several places, and that is the faith of belief that is shared by all born-again Christians. The faith, the common faith. Let me give you 4 quick examples that are contained within that common faith. First is the deity of Jesus Christ. This is foundational and must be established before the others are going to be meaningful or effective whatsoever. The second thing I'll mention is salvation by grace through faith. And that's a very important sequence of terminology and of the event of how salvation comes, and Paul reinforces and teaches that in another place. Also, the lordship of Jesus Christ in my personal life. We know he is Lord of Lords. We know he is titled in that. We know that he is Lord of all. But is he Lord of your life? Has the personal application come to the place where you've acknowledged and you've accepted and you've dedicated to that level? The fourth one I'll mention is belief in the bodily resurrection of Jesus Christ. Romans chapter 10 states that to be considered saved, a Christian, a believer, a Christ follower, you must accept and believe. Not just accept. You must believe in your heart that God has, I'm quoting from chapter 10, that God has raised him from the dead in a bodily form. There's some offshoots through the centuries of the Christian faith that define his resurrection as spirit only, that he didn't have a physical body, that he doesn't, and some even go, the Rosicrucian group, for instance, goes to the extreme that he didn't actually die, that he just kind of swooned on the cross and went into a little bit of a physical hibernation, and the therapy of a cold, dark tomb for the nights and the days that he was there was so very therapeutic that he arose in power and in good health on the third day, and that really stretches the credulity, you understand. Paul here again emphasizes the teaching of sound doctrine. His technique and approach, as we have mentioned in previous sessions, is not to explore the detail levels of the problem that is being taught or the false teaching, but to keep pounding sound doctrine, good doctrine, healthy doctrine. That doctrine that is going to give life is the best antidote to false teaching that he believes, and we believe that too. Sound doctrine prevents. Sound doctrine corrects. Sound doctrine changes lives at the most fundamental level of living. You just keep hearing, keep accepting, keep believing sound doctrine, and your life will change. You will mature, you will grow, you will become stronger. Your faith will be exuberant. Sometimes we've heard this comment, and it's so sad, "Pastor, don't give us doctrine. We're not in Bible school. Just give us some inspirational, devotional thoughts." Well, you can tune in to several dozen television programs that will give you that if that's what you want. But let me tell you, that's kind of like trying to grow up and be an adult and continuing to eat children's level pablum or just baby's oatmeal. You've got to move forward with more than just warm devotional comments. In verse 1, Paul states his own position in office, and I think this is significant. We go past it very quickly, but he lists himself as a servant and apostle. I want you to note that order that Paul describes himself. Having servant listed first is most important. Kind of like the list of ingredients on a jar or a package that you've seen. The first thing that's listed as an ingredient will be the highest percentage of content or volume. The first and the second item has a little less, and on down to the traces of elements that are contained within the product. He lists servant first and apostle second. You'll have to search in today's world to find another man or woman that will present themselves in this fashion. We tend to want the important things in our view, the most honorable things in our view, to be first and foremost. Also in verse 1, Paul states the basis of his authority, and it has to do with his faith and knowledge of the truth. Paul is an educated man. He has been to the finest of schools available on earth. He may know more about the Old Testament, and specifically the books of Moses, the law, the fasts, the feasts, the offerings, than any human being on earth. But he lists his credentials as the knowledge of the truth combined with his faith. That will qualify you as well, my friend, in the position of ministry and the function that God has called and equipped you to be. In verse 3, Paul describes his function and his calling, and it's so very simple: to proclaim the message. That's what he is to do. That is his acknowledgement and acceptance and belief. Basic belief. This is what I'm called to do, to proclaim the message. Well, you say, what is the message? What is he referring to? I'm glad you asked. I'm glad you brought that up. The message is the fact of the resurrection of Jesus of Nazareth from the dead, who is the Christ. And contained in that short sentence is the thrust of the early church. They didn't preach with great emphasis that Jesus was crucified, that Jesus is dead. They proclaimed Jesus is alive. He is the Christ, and he is coming again soon. With that statement and claim, the body of truth given to the people of God, the Christian believers, Paul does not emphasize style. He doesn't emphasize methodology of what your gifting is and how you present, but rather the content and the truth of the message, as well as he's combining now, very important, the motive of the one preaching and teaching that message. You see, we could have a mynah bird, a parrot from the jungles of South America, trained to preach. They could memorize a script. There are animals, there are birds that can memorize and regurgitate. We've got to have a heart motive behind what is being preached and taught. And Paul is very aware of that. So let me give you the characteristic of the message that he's talking about. This is the truth that changes a life of disobedience, a life of ungodliness, a life of rebellion, and I'll just go this far, a life of riot into a life of godliness and faithful service to Jesus Christ. In verse 4, he refers to Titus as mine own son after the common faith. Now that's quite a claim of relationship and their connection, and I'll come back to that in a moment. The deity of Jesus Christ. We're still talking about the elements of the common faith. The deity of Jesus Christ gives to us salvation by grace through faith. It gives us the confession that we must make with our heart and with our lips of the lordship of Jesus Christ in my personal life, the belief in the fact of bodily resurrection of Jesus from the dead. It is Paul's acceptance of this understanding of the common faith shared among all who call ourselves believers. It's applied and gives the non-prejudiced opportunity for a former Orthodox Jew, Pharisee leader to call a common Gentile Greek man mine own son. You suppose that Saul of Tarsus had some prejudice? I'll guarantee you he did. He thought for 6 or 7 major reasons how much better he was than everyone else. And here he is with a young Greek believer calling him his son. A lot of bridges have to be torn down. A lot of barriers have to be overcome for this former Orthodox Jew to make this kind of a statement. In verses 5 through 9, there is a solution here to the challenge of Titus. Paul deals with fixing the problem, not analyzing the problem. Now, the analysis has its place. So he begins, and we see that elders have qualifications and that elders have duties. Now, the old definition, the biblical definition of elder, would include all pastors as well. Can you be an elder and not a pastor? Yes, I believe so. Can you be a pastor without being an elder? No, I don't think so. An elder has a function within the local body. This is not a popularity contest. And this is not a path by which to buy your way into a power position where you, as they argued at the Last Supper, who's going to sit in the big chair next to Jesus? Who's going to sign the checks? Who's going to be on the board with power positions? And Luke records there was strife among the brethren as they discussed these power positions. And meanwhile, Jesus is gathering a basin, a pitcher, and a towel and begins to wash feet in response to their nonsense. The qualifications here that are given are very similar to what Paul has given in 1 Timothy chapter 3, and we've studied those just a few sessions ago. But there are a few additions here. For all practical applications, students, and we have done this as well, combine these lists to give a full perspective of what Paul is teaching. There are some overlap descriptions and there are some differences. And so we just combine them together to get the full meaning of what Paul is emphasizing. These qualifications are the same for a big city urban church, as we've mentioned, or for a small rural church, because they're not focused upon function. They're focused upon character. They are character issues. There's only one little phrase in 1 Timothy that could possibly refer to a function, and that is the phrase in the old King James English, apt or able to teach. Doesn't mean you are teaching, but it means you're able to teach, and it also can be interpreted teachable. Teachable. That is the only one out of the 20 or 22 or however many you may count, depending on the duplication that you use within the combining of the lists, that are not character issues. Paul wants to combine these character issues into a single person, in this case Titus, and the elders that are serving under him. So what should Titus do? We'll ask that question maybe a couple of times this evening. He is to put things in order in this church. He is to ordain and to install elders so they can function. We're not into just handing out titles to create a name tag or to give somebody a certificate or to kind of give them a massage to their ego and they feel really good because now they're somebody down at the church. This is a functional position, and we believe strongly that the function is far more important than the title. If they never recognize you at your local church and give you a fancy title, it's okay. You don't really need it, but you do need to function. You need to function in the gift that God has given to you. So Paul says, do this. Put things in order, install and ordain functioning elders like I told you to do. So there must have been a previous set of instructions, probably not written, for Titus, and he may have forgotten some of that list. The extra qualities and requirements that are mentioned, we'll touch on a few. Some of these will overlap with the other list, and we've gone through that extensively, so we'll just overlap as we need to. So first he deals with some social and domestic relationships, and he says, first of all, I want you to be blameless. That has to do with being above reproach or any groundless accusation. You see, it doesn't damage your reputation, shouldn't, or your character for someone to just bring a baseless accusation when there's no evidence. They're just mad. They've had their toes stepped on by the preacher on Sunday morning, and they just want to react in an angry way. But to be blameless is to say, yes, there may well be, and if you're in ministry long enough, there will be some accusation. But let's just make sure there's no basis. There's no rationale. There's no evidence that will support that charge. He also emphasizes the husband of one wife, which was certainly a new concept in the Roman Empire. Multiple, plural marriage was common. And he says for leadership, one wife. One wife. Usually in many societies, even today, multiple wives is not a sign of some deviant function or interest, but of the wealth of the person, the man, the husband. He has 6 wives. I know people in Africa today that are Christian believers have 6 wives. It's a statement publicly of their wealth. They can afford it. They have it. And he's saying, for multiple reasons, I do believe, elders, let's just have one wife. That's a new concept being introduced in his writing. And the emphasis is not technical as some will break it down. A lot of people get really bent out of shape with this phrase. The emphasis that Paul has here, and it's in the original language, faithfulness. Be faithful to your spouse. Here's a character, tone, statement, issue that is that looks good on an elder, that he is faithful to his spouse. The faithfulness is the character issue that we're seeing here. And then he mentions believing children, and the extreme of wild living in disobedience, is inappropriate. It indicates something about your training and also about the children themselves when they come to adult status. Let me tell you, they make their own choices, and you're not to blame. You're not to blame when adult children make choices that aren't appropriate for your reputation. Some personal qualifications that he then lists, that you're to be a steward. Again, this emphasizes faithfulness and understanding stewardship. This doesn't just touch on money or property or physical things, but also some spiritual aspects. You see, to understand that you're a steward, you must accept that you're not the owner, that someone else owns what you are administering. If that's finances, it's you're doing this on behalf of the church. You're doing this on behalf of the Lord. You're doing this in trust for someone else. In the case of spiritual matters, the gift that you've been given still belongs to Him, although you may be the resident where the gift resides and functions and ministers. It's not yours. You don't own what God has given to you. You don't own the gospel. We are a steward, and we want to be faithful in our stewardship. He says, not self-willed, not always seeking to have your own willful way. You see, there are those that mistakenly interpret this as, well, Paul must be wanting men in position that are weak. No, he wants strong, but the will has to be turned over to God's will. We have to submit our strong will to His, knowing that His objectives and goals need to be met, not mine. Mine are a distraction. They will draw away from the ministry of the gospel to people and the administration of the government of a local church. He also mentions not overbearing. You can be a strong leader without being an arrogant tyrant. So, Mark, they're really close. Well, that may be, but you need to be strong enough to not cross the line and to recognize when you're being overbearing. And Paul calls for that. And not a quick temper, he says. Not a quick temper. See, those that are controlled by their temper or by their anger, we need to save our anger for things that are evil and wrong and sinful. The devil should make you mad. You should have an outlet for your anger and for your temper, but stated in another way, if you don't have an anger for evil, you need to reassess and kind of build something up. The emphasis here, I believe, is on quick, the quick temper, the triggering, we'll call it. Not having, Paul's not having an absence of temper, but a control of your temper, and a control not only of the direction, but also the administration, where you are in control of that emotion, not it being in control of you. And when you let any emotion that you have begin to make decisions for you, you're headed to trouble. You're going to be sorry and have to pay an outrageous price for allowing your emotions to make your decisions in life. Not given to wine, he mentions here. I'll expand that, if you'll allow me, to all addictions and compulsions need to be under control. I'm not going to just focus on wine, and wine that has 15% alcohol, or say that 7% is good and 15 and 20 is bad, or the 40% or 50% that Mogan David 2020 has. All addictions need to be under control. All of them. Not given to wine is, I think, an expansive kind of a phrase. Not a striker. There should never be fist fights between the pastor and the deacons. Ever, 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 ever. Ever. We can't have men or women in leadership positions that settle their differences physically. That is completely inappropriate. And it only proves one thing. Who's the better fighter? It doesn't mean you're right because you're stronger, or you can box better, or you know martial arts. It doesn't prove you're right. It just proves that you won the fight that shouldn't have happened. It doesn't prove anything at all, except you lost your temper in connection with that. And I think that that disqualifies us from Paul's list if we are those that settle differences in a physical manner. And I believe it includes wife beaters as well. So facetiously I'll say this. Well, you know, our pastor only drinks wine and gets drunk on Friday night, and he only beats his wife on Saturdays. He's doing much better. I'm joking. I hope you understand that. That has to end. That just stops here and now. If you're a striker, if you strike your wife, that has to stop right now. And if you need deliverance, if you need mentoring, that's available. We can help you with that. Not given to the motivation of money. And boy, this is really a common problem. People that view ministry as easy, as a soft touch paycheck. So, wow, and this is extreme, I know. All that money for working 1 hour a week. And those that have made that kind of a statement to me in Bible college, they go, come on in, the water's fine. If that's what you think, jump on in, because you're going to get a rude awakening, my son, 1 hour a week, because that's the public display of Sunday morning, and that's all you do. Oh my goodness. Countless hours through the week of ministering, of pastoring, of preparing, of recovering, of so many things. Money just cannot be your motivation. If it is, then get yourself a suit, go downtown and get a job. And stay away from ministry. If money is where your heart is, don't think that ministry in any fashion is going to satisfy that whatsoever. Loving what is good. Boy, that is a short statement that covers so much. Loving the good. Loving good things, good concepts, good compassion. Loving what is good. You understand that, I'm sure. And then sober, and there are those that have taken this to the extreme, and they are morose. They don't believe that God ever had a sense of humor. I know a lady that believes that you shouldn't ever tell a funny story, that it's not proper, that it's not becoming. because God is so serious, and we should be so morosely serious, kind of like what you are at a funeral, a sad funeral, not the joyous ones that believers really should have. So serious, you can be sober without being morose, and you understand my emphasis there. Being just, or holding and having integrity. Please know that this does not mean you'll be mistake-free. We're still in the flesh and in a carnal world, and we still make mistakes. So that doesn't mean that our heart is not just, or that we are not holding the integrity that we should have for ministry, but it deals with our right intentions and our good motives. Will you make a mistake in judgment from time to time? Yes. I had someone not too long ago tell me, Mark, you are just not perfect. And I said, yeah, I know, and I'm not happy with that. I'm not pleased that I'm not perfect. I want to be perfect in my judgments, in the way I call things, the way I make decisions. I want it to be perfect, but I'm not. And it's a hard pill for me to swallow. I don't know about you, but I sure don't use that as an excuse for intentionally going beyond the line. Well, I'm not perfect. God knows that. But we're trying to walk toward perfection, are we not? And I'm comforted with John's statement, and when we see him, we shall be like him. And I'm going, yes, yes, we will be like him. Now the reference, of course, is physically, but I want to be like Jesus. I want to. And we strive, we do everything we can toward that end. Holy is another aspect that Paul lists here, and that can be translated unstained. Unstained. And you've got stained things in your laundry basket, and you know what that means. And the whiter it is, the more the stain shows up. And you may have looked at a brown shirt and go, well, that stain just not going to show very much. We're white. We're washed white in the blood of Jesus Christ, and every stain shows up, and we want to eradicate that as much as possible. Holy can also be translated, in this case, as different. We are different. Set apart for God is my favorite definition of holy. Set apart for the purposes of God. Are we still in the flesh? Yes, indeed we are. But he also then lists temperate or disciplined. Temperance kind of has a bad connotation with the temperance movement of 100 years ago that deals strictly with the demon rum or alcohol in general. Temperance. But discipline is something that is integrated into our lives if you are a disciple. It's the same word, is it not? Disciples are disciplined. They're disciplined by the Lord, they're disciplined by our godly leaders, and there is self-discipline. But in all cases, we possess some self-control. Self-control we need to learn. As you have taught your young ones when they were babies growing up, you were the controller, but you began conveying and teaching and modeling. Control yourself. Become mature. Grow up in your gifting that you have. Note that these are not something that you do in a specific activity, but it's rather who you are internally. It's the internal character issues. This is your statement of character. If people see these aspects and these characteristics, this is a statement of your testimony. And we're not putting on an act. We're not just doing things in front of people so that they see us in public and they approve, and then when you get home, you act different, you talk different, you are different. We need to act the same wherever we are. If language is inappropriate in church, it's inappropriate at home. And I think every one of you know what I'm talking about. Somehow there's a behavioral loosening of the reins when you get in private, and I'm one of the opinion that you should be consistent, that no matter where you are. And I think of the reasoning that the Orthodox Jews even today have when they wear the kippah, the yarmulke. Why? Because they're always in the presence of God. And for convenience, they only take that off when they're in the shower. And they put it right back on. Because we want a reminder, and I appreciate the concept behind this. I don't wear one. That we always are reminded, I'm in the presence of God. And I want to honor Him. And it doesn't matter where I am, what I'm doing, who I'm with, whether I'm in church, out of church, at home, at work, at school, at play. We're always in the presence of God and should honor Him with a consistency. And I hope you understand my heart in that I'm not trying to put something difficult on you or expect something from you that is unreasonable. I'm asking that you be consistent. Be the same wherever you are. Get some mentoring, get some coaching, go to some classes that will help you, go to a counselor, and raise the average, not just for selective places or around certain people, but always raise that average. The duties of the elder. Does he have responsibility? Yeah, according to Paul, there's some duties here, and they are conceptual. He doesn't tell you the style and that kind of makeup. He says, build up. That means edify. Build up with sound, healthy doctrine. He actually calls in a medical term here. Healthy doctrine. You see, if you can't build, it is so easy to tear down what others are trying to build for God. Please, if you have that penchant, if you have that bent, if you like to criticize and tear down, there's no gift of criticism. That's not your gifting. That's you out of control when you need to be building, edifying with sound, healthy doctrine. Doctrine builds character. Builds character. And that's one of the duties of an elder. He may be preaching, he may be teaching, maybe he's just giving testimonies and leading in prayer. Maybe he's an usher. But you build people. You encourage them in a godly fashion. The second thing here is rebuke those who oppose good doctrine. So, they won't like me. Well, that's just too bad. Amen. That's just too bad. We are to rebuke those who are in opposition to the teaching and preaching and the implementation of good, sound, healthy doctrine. So we're doing it in a positive way, but we're also stopping those who are impeding that progress. And, some of us, I'm afraid, are just too afraid of calling anybody out. Because you might lose a friend. Well, let me tell you, if they're opposing good doctrine, you've already lost a friend. If you had a friend in the beginning to start with. There are those who pose as friends, and they're not. And we need to oppose. We're not against the person. We're against the function of the opposition to good, sound doctrine. And then to understand the picture in twofold, the shepherd of the flock. because the under-shepherds, I'll call them, the elders that may work or minister underneath a pastor, are characterized by the shepherd's demeanor. And one of those things is to shepherd the flock, shepherd the sheep. The second thing is to ward off the wolves. In Psalm 23, that everyone knows so well, there's an interesting statement there that David makes. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Shepherds of old carried two sticks. One was a long stick with a crook at the end, and it was used to guide the sheep back on the path. It was a guiding stick. Does that bring comfort? Absolutely. That the shepherd will guide you, help correct your path when you begin to stray. The second stick is more stout. It's a shorter stick. It's a strong stick. And it's a stick designed to break the hind leg of the wolf. There's the staff, and then there's the other stick, the rod. The rod is not used on the sheep. It's for the wolf. It's for protection. And you can be overjoyed. You can be happy. You can be, in the words of David, comforted by both sticks. One, that he uses the gentle stick to guide you. Two, that he uses the mean stick on the wolf to break his leg. And three, that he never gets mixed up and uses the wrong stick on you. Are we comforted? Oh my, oh my. I'm comforted by the rod and the staff. They comfort me, both of them. He guides me, he loves me, he's gentle with me, and he uses the mean stick on the wolf. And I like them both. And a shepherd that doesn't have both sticks doesn't understand the job. And so that's part of what Paul is expecting from the elders under Titus. The identification of the problem. Here's an unusual function for the Apostle Paul. In Titus chapter 1, verses 10 through 16 specifically, he now goes into a description of the opponents of Pastor Titus. They are unruly. They are full of hot air instead of full of substance. They are given to the desires of the flesh. Let's take that out of King James English and just call it what it is in modern day term. They're idle gluttons. Idle gluttons. What a combination. A glutton is bad enough, but an idle glutton, one who is non-functional, one who is not working, one who is not plying the gift of ministry that they have been given. Idle is a bad charge. Glutton is a bad charge. But to be an idle glutton is just horrible. Instead of being faithful to control the desires that you have. I know you want to reach out for a second dessert. Maybe a third one. Maybe a third cut of pie, cake, or cookies. And you have to control that. Is there terrible things with having a piece of pie? No. But if you ate the whole pie, you're out of control. You're completely out of control, and it becomes a problem. And then, in this case, the followers of the people who are the idle gluttons, full of hot air instead of full of substance, and unruly in their behavior, their followers love it. They appreciate. They have followers in the church. Can you imagine the schisms, the factions, the divisions that exist within this culture of the church at Crete? Their followers love it. You see, these people are celebrities. They're not servants of the Lord. They're celebrities, and the people like it. And the observation that I'll give you is the complete tolerance of celebrities posing and acting like Christians is intolerable. And of course, we don't have that problem today. We don't have that problem today of people posing as Christians, but acting as celebrities and drawing a crowd unto themselves. What are these people doing? Well, they're mixing Jewish law and oral tradition from the Old Testament with the gospel of grace and faith. Much like those people in the city of Galatia, they taught that your salvation is based upon the sacrifice of Jesus Christ and obedience, strict obedience to the law of Moses concerning dietary restrictions, concerning circumcision, concerning holidays and holy days, and any other thing they want to add to the list that seems appropriate at the time. You see that apparently for them the sacrifice of Jesus Christ is insufficient. It's not enough. It has to be supplemented with your works of the flesh, obeying the law of Moses. You know, well, maybe you've heard it, the sermons on haircuts and hemlines, fashion, kind of dress, and whether you have short hair or long hair. And they don't want any long hair on the men, and they don't want any short hair on the women. And on it goes. Clothesline sermons, they're called. Why would they do such a thing? Paul identifies clearly the motive in verse 11. And he says, the motive of these false teachers is money. And it pervades, it tempts, it invades, it's available at any level of Christian service. In verse 12, he quotes, let's see if I can say this name correctly, Epimenides. He is a Cretan philosopher, about 600 BC, and he was famous for saying this. This is a quote from this philosopher. Cretans are always liars, evil beasts, and idle gluttons. Now, what a statement that shows such a low expectation of their own people and of themselves personally, and that added to the Greek language, and even it has transcended over into English, and you may have said it, you may have heard it, and not known where it came from. Oh, you're acting like a Cretan. You probably heard it. Here's where it came from 600 BC. These people are terrible. They behave terrible. Their character is bad. They're Cretans, Neanderthals, cavemen. They're so base in their desires and in their function. Some might advise Titus, get away from those low-class people. They don't appreciate your high-quality ministry anyway. Sounds like good advice, but let me tell you this. These Cretans desperately need a godly ministry. They desperately need a pastor with strong leadership that will model the principles of Jesus and his gospel for them. They desperately need a scriptural-based church. They need a fellowship with parameters, with limits, with enforcement, with definitions. The Cretans need you. Are you a higher class ministry? Those at the bottom need you. Who else is going to help bring the message of salvation but you? But you. And you may find yourself in a situation where you see that the better you function, the better you are in character, maybe your audience is going to be worse because you can handle it. And they desperately need you. They need you as a model of Jesus. They can't see Jesus except the Jesus in you. And they need you in their lives. In verses 10 and 14, we're still in chapter 1, there are some problems, and I'll just briefly touch on things to restate the problems facing Pastor Titus as a result of his predecessors teaching the congregation an unfortunate mixture of Jewish legalism, man-made traditions, mysticism, and mixed with it the gospel of peace of Jesus Christ. What a mess. I've been in situations, I've been in tribes, indigenous people groups, where mysticism has been combined with the gospel, and it is a holy mess, I'm telling you. And it's very hard to unscramble those eggs. It's very hard, but not impossible. The result is described in Titus 1, 15 and 16, professing that they know God. Catch the sarcasm here. Professing they know God, but denying Him in their works, and producing a life that is abominable, disgusting, disobedient, and they turn away from good works, Paul says. They turn away from good works. They see that which we should be involved in as Christian believers as the outgrowth and the outcropping of our ministry, and they turn away because they're busy being idle gluttons. Busy being idols. You hear the contradiction there? They're busy. Oh yeah, they're busy. They're busy doing nothing, and they don't want to be involved in things that are inconvenient, things that take work, and things that are maybe expensive. It might cost them something. What should Pastor Titus do? We'll just mention these few things and we'll close for tonight. Titus 1:9, exhort and convince by sound doctrine. Exhort and convince by sound doctrine. That's in verse 9. Then we see in verse 11, prevent the false teachers from teaching. Stop them. Don't just take them in and give them a hint. And that's in verse 13. Give them strong rebuke, not soft, gentle hints. These people don't catch hints. They have to be confronted. They have to be stopped in your church, or they will destroy it. They will destroy a local fellowship, and if you don't stop them, you will have contributed to the demise. Overview of these whole things. Protect the flock, for it is not yours, but it is God's. The flock is God's, and you're the under shepherd, under the good shepherd, Jesus himself, and you're responsible to shepherd these sheep, but treat them as his flock, and you are the steward. We'll finish the book of Titus, the letter to this man, in the next session. We hope that you will join us. From now till then, we pray that God will bless you and empower you in your ministry. God bless you tonight.
This program has been produced by A Life Devoted to Ministry, LTD Production, and is home of training trainers to lead. We hope you enjoyed this program. For more information or to support our ministry, please visit lvtms.org.